Imagine waking up before the first light of dawn, the cold air of the medieval town stinging your face as you step out of your modest home. Your day begins not with coffee or a leisurely breakfast, but with the labor of a profession that has defined your life, body, and mind for as long as you can remember. You are a blacksmith in a world without electricity, running water, or even modern safety standards. Your hands, your eyes, and your muscles are the instruments that sustain the very life of your community. Every day people depend on you to make the tools, weapons, and objects that keep society moving. And yet, while others rely on your skill, your existence is one of relentless work, physical torment, and near constant exposure to danger. The forge, your workplace, is both a place of creation and a crucible of suffering. From the moment you step into the workshop, the air is thick with the acrid smell of smoke, soot, and burning coal. The forge itself is a roaring beast, belching heat that sears your skin and blurs the line between comfort and agony. The flames dance, bright and unpredictable, as you prepare your tools and materials for the day ahead. Your hammer, your tongs, and your anvil are extensions of your body, but they are also instruments of exhaustion, demanding precision, strength, and unwavering attention. The first task of the day is often to heat the iron, and already your arms begin to tire from lifting and manipulating the heavy pieces. The iron, once red hot, will burn you if mishandled, and yet it must be molded with skill and force into the shape required. Each strike of the hammer sends a vibration through your arms, shoulders, and back, a reminder that this work is as punishing to your body as it is essential to the world around you. Hours stretch on. Sweat pours down your face and drips into your eyes, stinging like acid as the smoke clings to your skin and hair. Your clothes, already coarse and heavy, become soaked and stick to you, each movement a reminder of the labor you endure. Outside, life goes on in the medieval town, but inside the workshop the world is reduced to the forge, the metal, and your hands. You hammer, bend, and shape over and over, creating objects that others will take for granted. Horseshoes that will bear the weight of animals across miles of rough terrain, plowshares that will till the fields feeding the town, nails that will hold homes and furniture together, and weapons that will defend the community in times of war. Every piece you craft is essential, yet the work itself is monotonous, punishing, and physically grueling. The physical toll is immediate. Your back aches from long hours spent bending over the anvil, muscles straining with each swing of the hammer. Your hands are calloused, blistered, and sometimes bloody, testament to the constant heat and pressure they endure. Fingers grow stiff from repetitive motion, and the joints begin to swell and ache, early signs of what centuries later would be diagnosed as chronic musculoskeletal issues. Your lungs are filled with coal dust and smoke, each breath a mixture of necessity and danger, as prolonged exposure can lead to severe respiratory problems over time. Even your eyes are at risk, constantly exposed to sparks, glare, and flying debris, threatening burns and long-term vision impairment. Despite the grueling nature of the work, speed and efficiency are demanded. A town depends on you to produce enough metal tools to sustain daily life, and in times of conflict the pressure becomes almost unbearable. Weapons must be forged quickly and precisely, for a poorly made sword or spear could cost lives on the battlefield. Farmers cannot wait for delayed plowshares, and horses without properly fitted shoes struggle to work or travel. The responsibility on your shoulders is immense, yet the recognition for your skill is minimal. To the townspeople, the blacksmith's work is expected. It is essential, but rarely admired, beyond a passing nod of thanks. The daily grind of the forge offers no glory, only the satisfaction of a job completed, the fleeting respite of a cool drink, and the knowledge that tomorrow the process will begin again. Workshop is not just a place of work, but also your home in many ways. Space is limited, and many blacksmiths live in small quarters adjacent to their forge, with their family nearby. The smoke and soot infiltrate every corner of the room, clinging to bedding, clothing, and walls. Simple household tasks are performed in the same environment as the forge, with the heat and grime never fully leaving you. Life outside the workshop is rare, and leisure is almost non-existent, as the demands of the profession extend from dawn until well after dusk. Children may play nearby, yet they too are exposed to the dangers of sparks and heavy tools. Your family's survival is intertwined with your labor, adding an emotional weight to the physical demands. Every coin earned is hard-won, and the risk of injury or disease looms over every hour of work. The tools themselves are relentless. Hammers are heavy, tongs unwieldy, and anvils unyielding. Each strike of the hammer requires not just strength but precision. A misaligned blow could ruin a piece of metal, wasting hours of labor and potentially endangering lives if the product is critical. The iron itself is stubborn, resistant to shaping, requiring repeated heating and hammering to achieve the desired form. Each day, the blacksmith engages in a delicate balance of force and finesse, their body enduring physical punishment to ensure the community's needs are met. This repetition, combined with the heat and danger, leaves little room for rest. Pain becomes routine, exhaustion a constant companion, and yet the work must continue without pause. In addition to the physical labor, the blacksmith faces the challenge of mastery over materials. Iron must be heated to the perfect temperature, neither too cold nor too hot, or it will crack or deform. Steel requires even more precision, with repeated heating, hammering, and quenching in water or oil to achieve the correct hardness. Every strike, every movement is an exercise in skill honed over years of apprenticeship. Young blacksmiths spend long years learning under the watchful eye of a master, enduring the same heat, smoke, and labor, building the strength and dexterity required for the craft. Even after years of experience, no blacksmith is immune to mistakes, and the margin for error is slim. One misjudged blow can ruin a project, and in a time when resources are precious, that failure carries consequences beyond mere frustration. The rhythm of the day is unyielding. Breaks are rare, and meals are often eaten quickly, standing over the forge while hammering continues. The body becomes accustomed to discomfort, but never immune. Fatigue accumulates, injuries linger, and the threat of sudden harm is constant. Social life is limited. While other townspeople gather for feasts or leisure, the blacksmith remains tied to the forge, ensuring that tools, weapons, and repairs are ready for use. The isolation is not just physical but also psychological, as the demands of the profession leave little room for reflection, relaxation, or creative freedom outside the necessary work. Yet, for all the suffering, there is a strange dignity in the labor. Each piece of metal shaped is a testament to skill, endurance, and the blacksmith's vital role in society. Villagers may take the tools for granted, but their dependence on the blacksmith is total. Without someone to shoe horses, mend plows, and forge swords, towns would falter, fields would go untilled, and armies would be left defenseless. This knowledge provides a sense of purpose amidst the suffering, a recognition, however private, that your toil is not in vain. The day ends long after the sun has set, the forge dimming only as exhaustion forces your body to relent. Your hands are blackened and blistered, your muscles ache, and your lungs are heavy with smoke. Yet the work is not complete. Tomorrow the same cycle will begin anew, and the same intensity of labor, danger, and responsibility awaits. The life of a medieval blacksmith is a life of endless work, relentless physical punishment, and constant exposure to peril. Every day is a struggle, every task a test of endurance and skill, and every success a quiet triumph in a world that takes the blacksmith's labor for granted. In the medieval era, being a blacksmith was more than a job. It was a crucible that tested the body, mind, and spirit. It demanded strength, patience, and precision beyond what most people today could imagine. And yet, for all the suffering and toil, the blacksmith was the lifeblood of the community, a vital figure whose work sustained society itself. The craft was grueling, the conditions harsh, and the rewards minimal, but it was indispensable, a silent force that held the medieval world together through sweat, fire, and iron. To truly understand the life of a medieval blacksmith is to glimpse a world where survival, skill, and endurance were inseparably intertwined, and where every day was a battle against heat, exhaustion, and the unyielding demands of a society dependent on your labor. The medieval forge was more than a workplace. It was a theater of constant danger, a place where every moment carried the potential for serious injury or even death. From the moment a blacksmith stepped into the workshop, the air seemed charged with risk, an invisible tension that hung over every action. Unlike modern workplaces, where safety protocols and protective equipment offer some measure of protection, the medieval blacksmith's environment was raw, uncontrolled, and unyielding. Sparks flew unpredictably from the roaring fire, molten metal hissed as it met water or oil, and the heavy tools that were indispensable to the craft could just as easily become instruments of harm. In this world, danger was not an occasional occurrence. It was a constant companion, lurking in every corner of the forge and in every task undertaken. One of the most immediate hazards came from the very materials blacksmiths worked with. Iron and steel, heated to a red-hot glow, became intensely volatile. Even a small slip could result in serious burns. The molten metal splashed without warning, sometimes leaping like liquid fire from the crucible or anvil. A moment's inattention, a miscalculation in movement, or even a misjudged angle of a hammer strike could send scalding metal onto the skin. The pain of a burn was immediate and excruciating, leaving marks that would last a lifetime. In an era before modern medicine, even a minor burn could become infected, leading to long-term disability or death. Blacksmiths lived with this threat every day, learning to move carefully, anticipate the unpredictable behavior of the metal, and trust their instincts honed through years of experience. The tools themselves were equally dangerous. The hammer, a symbol of strength and skill, was also a potential weapon turned against its wielder. An errant swing could crush fingers or hands, leaving permanent damage. The tongs necessary for gripping and manipulating hot metal were heavy and unwieldy. A moment's lapse could allow the heated iron to slip and land on a foot, a leg, or another part of the body. Even the anvil, the central piece of the workshop, presented hazards. Blacksmiths frequently had to position heavy metal pieces with precision, balancing them carefully while hammering. A sudden loss of balance could result in the iron falling, smashing fingers, toes, or worse. Beyond the immediate physical threats, the environment itself was perilous. The forge was hot beyond measure, a furnace that radiated intense heat throughout the room. Temperatures near the fire could reach levels that made breathing difficult, and prolonged exposure led to exhaustion, dehydration, and heat stroke. Sweat drenched the blacksmith, making tools slippery and increasing the likelihood of accidents. Coal dust and smoke filled the air, infiltrating eyes, lungs, and skin, reducing visibility and making every movement a calculated risk. Inhaling these particles over the years often resulted in chronic respiratory problems, a slow, lingering consequence of the work that could cut a blacksmith's life short. The act of shaping metal was itself fraught with danger. Forging involved repeated, precise strikes, but even the most experienced blacksmiths were not immune to error. A hammer that glanced off an uneven surface could rebound unpredictably, striking the blacksmith's own body. The metal could warp, crack, or shatter under pressure, sending shards flying in all directions. Blacksmiths had to remain perpetually alert, their eyes scanning the glowing metal for imperfections, their muscles poised to react instantly to any unexpected behavior of the materials. Fatigue only amplified these risks. After hours of labor, the body's reflexes slowed, yet the demands of the forge remained relentless. Quenching, the process of cooling hot metal in water or oil, added another layer of peril. The moment the red-hot iron touched the liquid, it hissed violently, producing scalding steam and sometimes explosive splashes. A blacksmith had to anticipate the metal's reaction perfectly. Otherwise, The steam or hot liquid could burn skin, eyes, or clothing. Even a simple task, like transferring a piece of steel from the anvil to the quench, demanded concentration, precision, and respect for the material's power. One lapse in judgment could turn routine work into disaster. Fire itself was an ever-present danger. The forge's flames were uncontrolled, fed by coal and bellows, and capable of spreading rapidly if disturbed. Workshops were often cramped, with flammable materials nearby, wooden beams, tools, and shavings, that could ignite if a spark strayed. Blacksmiths learned to navigate this fiery environment, but accidents were inevitable. Fires could destroy not only the workshop but the blacksmith's livelihood, possessions, and home, leaving the family destitute in addition to the immediate physical risks. In addition to burns, cuts, and bruises, blacksmiths faced dangers from the sheer weight of the materials they handled. A block of iron could weigh several dozen pounds, and moving it required strength, technique, and concentration. Dropping a piece on a foot could shatter bones, mishandling could strain muscles or tear tendons. Repeated lifting and bending over an anvil day after day caused cumulative injuries, weakening the body and increasing vulnerability to accidents. Even walking in the workshop was risky, as metal scraps, tools, and sparks littered the floor, creating hazards at every step. The mental strain of constant danger added another layer to the blacksmith's burden. Every task carried the weight of potential consequences, not just physical harm, but economic and social repercussions. A mistake in forging a weapon could compromise a soldier's life. An improperly made tool could ruin a farmer's harvest. Blacksmiths carried this responsibility in their minds, and the stress was unrelenting. The combination of physical danger and mental pressure demanded extraordinary focus, stamina, and resilience. Over time, the cumulative effect of this stress could manifest in anxiety, exhaustion, and even long-term psychological strain. Apprenticeship, which was essential to becoming a master blacksmith, introduced young workers to these dangers at an early age. Boys as young as 12 or 14 would spend years under a master's supervision, learning not just the craft, but the risks inherent in every action. They were taught to respect the materials, anticipate the behavior of fire and metal, and respond quickly to hazards. Many apprentices suffered injuries during training, some severe enough to end their budding careers. Mistakes were punished not only by burns or cuts, but sometimes by harsh discipline, making the learning process brutal in both body and mind. The risk of infection and disease further compounded the dangers. Even minor wounds could become serious due to the lack of antiseptics and rudimentary medical care. Cuts from sharp metal or burns from molten iron often festered, leading to gangrene or other life-threatening infections. A blacksmith could survive decades of intense labor only to be felled by something as simple as a puncture wound. The combination of occupational hazards and limited health care meant that every day in the forge carried a hidden, lingering threat beyond the immediate dangers of fire and metal. Blacksmiths also faced environmental hazards outside the forge. Many workshops were located near stables or on the edges of towns, exposing workers to horse manure, mud, and contaminated water. The combination of unsanitary conditions and open wounds created an even higher risk of infection. Medieval towns were crowded, and diseases spread quickly, making a blacksmith's already vulnerable body even more susceptible. The toll on health was relentless, a cumulative effect of constant danger, physical labor, and exposure to harmful substances. Even seasoned blacksmiths developed rituals and strategies to survive the forge. They learned to position themselves to minimize the risk of injury, to move predictably with the metal, and to anticipate the behavior of sparks and molten iron. Protective clothing was minimal, leather aprons, gloves, and thick boots, but it offered limited protection against the hazards that surrounded them. The blacksmith's skill was measured not only by the quality of their work, but by their ability to navigate danger repeatedly without succumbing to it. Each day was a test of endurance, foresight, and courage, and only those who could master both the craft and the risk survived long enough to gain mastery. The danger was not abstract, it was immediate, tangible, and ever-present. The clang of hammer on anvil was accompanied by the hiss of hot metal, the crackle of fire, and the occasional sharp scream of a fellow worker who had misjudged a swing or been splashed by molten iron. Injuries were commonplace, and fatalities were not rare. A blacksmith's family often knew that the man working at the forge might not return home unscathed. Yet the profession was essential, and there was no alternative for those seeking livelihood in a medieval town. In the midst of this peril, the blacksmith's work retained a rhythm and flow, a dance between skill and danger. Each movement was deliberate, each strike calculated, and each decision weighed against potential consequences. The forge demanded respect and obedience, punishing carelessness and rewarding attentiveness. For the blacksmith, survival was not a matter of luck alone, but of experience, intuition, and a deep understanding of the volatile materials under their care. Despite the constant threats, blacksmiths developed resilience. Their bodies adapted to repetitive stress, their eyes became attuned to subtle changes in metal color, and their minds learned to anticipate the unpredictable. Yet the danger never disappeared. It was an inseparable part of their lives. Even the most skilled blacksmiths, working with years of experience, remained vulnerable to accidents, illness, and the unpredictable behavior of fire and iron. Every day was a negotiation with risk, a balance between creation and destruction, and a testament to the courage and endurance required to survive in a world where danger was constant. The life of a medieval blacksmith, then, was defined by peril. Every hammer swing, every piece of hot metal, every step in the workshop carried the potential for injury or death. The dangers were physical, mental, and environmental, and they compounded over time to create a life of relentless risk. Yet blacksmiths persevered, not out of recklessness, but out of necessity, skill, and a commitment to their craft. They were the unsung heroes of medieval society, shaping the tools and weapons that allowed their communities to survive, all while facing dangers that most people today could scarcely imagine. Their lives were a daily negotiation with fire, metal, and mortality, and their survival required constant vigilance, strength, and courage. In this environment, danger was not merely an obstacle, it was a teacher, shaping every movement, every decision, and every moment of awareness. The medieval blacksmith's life was a relentless test of endurance, skill, and nerve, where mistakes could be catastrophic and survival depended on constant attention, experience, and respect for the power of the materials they commanded. To witness a blacksmith at work was to witness a master navigating a world of fire, metal, and perpetual risk, a life defined not only by creation but by the ever-present shadow of danger that accompanied every moment at the forge. In the medieval world, the life of a blacksmith was defined not only by the grueling labor and constant danger of the forge, but also by their precarious position within society. Though their work was essential to the survival and functioning of towns, villages, and even armies, blacksmiths occupied a strange and often contradictory social role. On one hand, they were skilled artisans whose mastery of fire, metal, and tools was indispensable. Without them, farmers could not till the land, soldiers could not wield reliable weapons, and every building would lack nails and hinges. On the other hand, despite this centrality to everyday life, blacksmiths were rarely afforded significant social prestige. They were necessary, yes, but they were not noble, their wealth was modest, their influence limited, and their contributions often taken for granted by those around them. To understand the social standing of a medieval blacksmith, one must first consider the rigid hierarchies of medieval society. Society was structured in tiers, with nobility and clergy at the top, followed by merchants, skilled tradesmen, peasants, and laborers. Blacksmiths, despite their skill and importance, often fell somewhere in the middle of this hierarchy, respected for their craft but not for their social standing. They were not part of the ruling elite, nor did they enjoy the privileges of wealth that merchants sometimes amassed through trade. They were skilled laborers, a necessary component of the social machinery, yet their role was defined more by utility than prestige. Guilds played a significant role in shaping a blacksmith's social position. Many towns had blacksmith guilds that regulated the profession, provided training, and protected members' interests to some degree. Joining a guild was a mark of legitimacy, a recognition of skill and professionalism. However, guild membership came with strict rules, fees, and obligations. Apprenticeship was often lengthy and demanding, requiring young workers to submit to years of intense labor under a master, often for little to no pay. Even after completing their training, blacksmiths had to navigate guild regulations, pay dues, and compete with other craftsmen in their community. The guild could provide protection and a degree of status, but it did not elevate the blacksmith to a position of wealth or societal power. Income was a constant concern. Unlike the nobility, who relied on land and inheritance, or merchants, who could profit from trade and speculation, blacksmiths earned their living primarily from the labor of their hands. Payment for work varied depending on the town, the demand for goods, and the complexity of the task. Simple items such as nails or horseshoes might earn a few coins, while more specialized work like swords or ornate tools could bring in more substantial payment. Yet even skilled blacksmiths often struggled to make ends meet. The work was exhausting, the hours long, and the financial reward modest. A blacksmith's income rarely allowed for luxury. Most lived in small functional homes, often adjacent to or integrated with their workshops, their lives constrained by the demands of their trade. The structure of payment also reflected the precarious nature of their profession. Many blacksmiths worked on a commission basis, producing items for townspeople, soldiers, or farmers as needed. This meant that their income fluctuated with demand, leaving them vulnerable to seasonal variations, economic downturns, or competition from other craftsmen. A cold winter or poor harvest could dramatically reduce the need for new tools, plows, and horseshoes, directly affecting the blacksmith's ability to feed and support their family. In a world without savings accounts, social safety nets, or reliable insurance, the blacksmith's livelihood was in constant jeopardy, dependent on both their skill and the unpredictable needs of the community. The perception of blacksmiths in society was equally complex. While their skill was acknowledged, it was often seen as utilitarian rather than prestigious. Villagers relied on them daily but rarely celebrated their contributions beyond a passing nod of appreciation. Blacksmiths were expected to be competent, efficient, and reliable, but social recognition rarely matched the importance of their work. They were admired for their craft, yes, but their labor was assumed, and their value was measured primarily in terms of the services they provided, not their status as individuals. This subtle undervaluing of their profession added a psychological weight to the already taxing physical labor. Family dynamics were deeply intertwined with the blacksmith's social and financial reality. Many blacksmiths lived in small quarters adjacent to their workshops, their families sharing the same confined space where fire, smoke, and the constant clanging of metal dominated daily life. Children grew up amidst the heat and noise, often assisting in minor tasks or learning the trade from a young age. This closeness created bonds of shared labor and experience, but also reinforced the intensity of the work. There was little privacy, few moments of respite, and almost no separation between home life and the demands of the forge. The pressure to maintain a stable income, provide for family needs, and sustain the business of the forge was relentless, leaving blacksmiths little time for leisure, reflection, or personal pursuits. Social mobility for blacksmiths was limited. Unlike merchants, who could accumulate wealth and influence through trade, or artisans in certain cities who could gain fame for their skill, Most blacksmiths remained within the constraints of their class and occupation. Advancement was primarily tied to skill, reputation, and the ability to pass on knowledge to apprentices or family members. A blacksmith might gain local respect as a master craftsman or guild member, but this recognition rarely translated into broader social power or financial security. Their lives were defined by the constant balance of skill, labor, and necessity, rather than ambition, wealth, or societal influence. Even within the context of their communities, blacksmiths were subject to subtle forms of social limitation. They were essential to village life, yet their work placed them in a position of dependence on others for economic survival. A blacksmith could produce the finest swords or the most durable plows, but without patrons, soldiers, or farmers to purchase these goods, the labor yielded little benefit. This dependence created a paradox. The blacksmith was simultaneously indispensable and constrained, holding a unique power through their skills while remaining vulnerable to the social and economic structures around them. The perception of blacksmiths also varied by region and culture. In some towns, a highly skilled blacksmith could achieve recognition for artistry, producing elaborate metalwork or ornate weapons that elevated their reputation. In others, the focus remained on utility and function, with no acknowledgement beyond practical necessity. This variability meant that blacksmiths constantly navigated a complex social landscape, striving to maintain both competence and reputation while recognizing the limits of their social influence. The financial pressures of the trade were compounded by the constant need to maintain tools, purchase raw materials, and sometimes even pay taxes or dues to local authorities or guilds. Iron, coal, and other necessary supplies were expensive, and mismanagement could jeopardize the entire operation. A blacksmith needed not only physical strength and skill, but also a sharp sense of resource management, negotiating prices for materials and planning for periods of lower demand. The balance between expenditure, income, and survival was delicate, requiring constant attention and careful decision-making. Despite these challenges, blacksmiths found ways to assert their identity and authority within their craft. Mastery of the forge offered a form of respect and recognition within the workshop, among apprentices, and within the guild structure. A master blacksmith commanded loyalty, attention, and admiration for their skill, even if broader society remained indifferent. This professional pride provided a measure of psychological reward, a sense of accomplishment that partially offset the hardships of low-pay, social limitation, and relentless labor. Even in the absence of wealth, blacksmiths contributed significantly to the cultural and economic fabric of their communities. Their work enabled agriculture, construction, defense, and transportation, pillars of medieval life. Without the blacksmith, towns could not function, armies could not fight, and survival itself would be threatened. This paradox, critical importance paired with modest recognition, defined much of the blacksmith's social reality. Their value was unquestioned in practical terms, yet their status remained constrained, a reflection of a society that prioritized hierarchy and utility over equitable acknowledgement of labor. Over time, the financial and social pressures of the trade could leave lasting effects on a blacksmith's life. Many labored for decades with little improvement in material circumstances, their health deteriorating under the combined effects of intense labor, exposure to heat and smoke, and the hazards of the forge. Injuries accumulated, chronic pain developed, and yet the necessity of income and family support compelled continued work. Life expectancy was lower than many other trades, not solely because of the dangers of the forge, but also due to the compounded stress of financial uncertainty, social limitation, and relentless labor. Apprentices, children, and family members inherited this cycle, learning the trade under conditions that were often physically and socially demanding. They witnessed the limits of social mobility firsthand and came to understand that skill alone did not guarantee wealth or status. For many, the blacksmith's life was a cautionary tale of endurance, resilience, and the delicate balance between necessity and personal aspiration. Yet within this constrained reality, blacksmiths developed strategies to assert control and achieve a sense of dignity. Reputation, craftsmanship, and reliability became their currency in a world that offered little in terms of material reward. They cultivated relationships with patrons, negotiated for fair compensation, and sought to distinguish themselves through superior skill or specialized work. Even modest recognition within the guild or town provided a sense of professional identity and pride that contrasted sharply with the physical and economic hardships they endured. Ultimately, the life of a medieval blacksmith was one of paradox. They were indispensable yet modest, skilled yet socially constrained, hard-working yet perpetually vulnerable to economic and social pressures. Their labor was the foundation upon which towns, villages, and even kingdoms relied, yet their status rarely reflected the magnitude of their contribution. They existed in a space of quiet tension, necessary to society, yet constrained by the very structures they helped sustain. To understand the medieval blacksmith fully is to see beyond the hammer and anvil, beyond the fire and metal, and into the complex interplay of skill, social expectation, and economic reality. It is to recognize the sacrifices required not only to survive the forge, but to navigate a society that depended on their labor, while offering only modest reward and recognition. Their lives were defined by labor, danger, and perseverance, yet also by an enduring pride in their craft, a quiet assertion of value in a world that too often measured worth by status rather than skill. In the end, the blacksmith story is a testament to resilience in the face of limitation, creativity constrained by necessity, and the delicate balance between labor, recognition, and survival. It is a reminder that even the most essential figures in society may struggle silently, their contributions foundational, yet underappreciated, their daily lives shaped by forces beyond their control. In every hammer strike, every forged sword, every bent horseshoe, the blacksmith affirmed both their indispensable role and the quiet dignity of enduring a life that demanded so much while offering so little. The life of a medieval blacksmith was not only defined by the relentless labor and constant danger of the forge, but also by the long-term consequences that their work inflicted on the body. Every strike of the hammer, every lift of molten metal, and every hour spent bent over the anvil left its mark, shaping not only the tools of society, but also the tools of their own survival, their very bodies. Blacksmiths worked in a time before modern medicine, before ergonomic design, and before any real understanding of occupational hazards. The physical demands were immediate and punishing, but it was the cumulative effect over years, even decades, that transformed a profession into a lifelong sentence of pain, deterioration, and chronic illness. From the very first day at the forge, the human body is subjected to stresses it was not designed to endure. The act of hammering red-hot iron repetitively requires immense upper body strength, but it also subjects the shoulders, back, wrists, and hands to constant strain. Over time, this leads to musculoskeletal wear and tear, with joints stiffening and muscles weakening in uneven ways. Arthritis in the hands and elbows, chronic shoulder pain, and spinal misalignment became common afflictions among blacksmiths. Each hammer strike, each lift of iron, adds another layer of stress to bones and tendons that modern science now recognizes as cumulative trauma. For blacksmiths, however, this slow degradation was inevitable, often manifesting in middle age as pain so severe it limited their ability to work, or in older blacksmiths as near total loss of mobility in the hands and arms. The repeated bending, lifting, and twisting required to maneuver heavy pieces of iron also took a toll on the back. Centuries before ergonomics, blacksmiths developed a distinctive posture out of necessity, leaning over the anvil in ways that maximized efficiency but compromised spinal health. Long hours hunched over the forge caused compressed discs, chronic lower back pain, and postural deformities. Some blacksmiths walked with a slight stoop, a permanent reminder of the work that shaped not only their livelihoods, but also their physical form. Over time, these postural changes could lead to further complications, nerve compression, chronic fatigue, and even impaired circulation, making the simplest movements painful and slow. Hands, the primary instruments of the blacksmith, endured both acute and chronic trauma. Blisters, burns, and cuts were daily occurrences, but the long-term effects were often worse. Repetitive hammering caused tendinitis, swelling, and reduced dexterity. Fingers might become permanently bent, calloused, or weakened. Loss of nails and scarring were commonplace, and injuries often compounded over time. In an era without effective treatment, even minor injuries could leave permanent disabilities. These physical limitations were not just painful, they threatened the blacksmith's livelihood, since skill and precision were essential to every piece of work. The eyes, too, suffered from years of exposure to sparks, intense light, and metal dust. Medieval blacksmiths worked near furnaces emitting brilliant heat and glare, with sparks flying unpredictably in every direction. Without protective goggles or shields, eyes were vulnerable to burns, foreign particles, and chronic irritation. Some blacksmiths experienced reduced vision, cataracts, or permanent eye damage, making the precise work of shaping metal increasingly difficult. By middle age, many blacksmiths struggled to see fine details, relying on muscle memory and years of experience to complete tasks that once demanded sharp eyesight. Lungs and respiratory health were another hidden casualty of the forge. The constant inhalation of smoke, coal dust, and metal particles resulted in chronic respiratory illnesses. Blacksmiths often suffered from shortness of breath, persistent coughing, and susceptibility to infections. Over decades, prolonged exposure could lead to conditions such as pneumoconiosis, a debilitating disease caused by inhaled metal particles, which compromise lung function and ultimately reduce life expectancy. Breathing itself became a laborious task, compounding the exhaustion from physical labor and heat stress. The air of the forge necessary for shaping iron became a slowly poisoning environment, a silent threat that worsened over years. Burns, a daily hazard, left permanent marks on the body. Even small splashes of molten metal could leave deep scars. Severe burns often damaged underlying tissues, leading to stiffness, reduced mobility, and chronic pain. Infections were common, as medical treatment was primitive. Even minor wounds could become gangrenous. The skin itself became thickened and scarred from repeated exposure to heat and abrasives, while nerve damage sometimes led to reduced sensation, leaving blacksmiths vulnerable to future injuries. These physical scars were a visible testament to the harsh realities of the forge, marking blacksmiths as laborers who had endured pain that most of their neighbors could scarcely imagine. The effects of this labor were not confined to physical health alone. Chronic pain and fatigue, combined with exposure to danger and the stress of constant responsibility, took a significant toll on mental health. Blacksmiths carried the burden of knowing that a single mistake could ruin a project, harm a customer, or even endanger a life. The pressure of producing perfect tools, weapons, and equipment day after day in a physically punishing environment created stress that could lead to anxiety, irritability, and emotional exhaustion. In a world where the mind and body were inseparable in labor, mental strain compounded the physical suffering, creating a cycle of stress that persisted for decades. Life expectancy for blacksmiths was markedly lower than for many other tradespeople. Decades of repetitive labor, exposure to heat and toxic fumes, and cumulative injuries weakened the body over time. By the age of 50 or 60, many blacksmiths were crippled by arthritis, lung disease, or vision impairment. Some could no longer work effectively at the forge, forced into early retirement or dependent on family members to continue their livelihood. Death from infection, respiratory illness, or complications from untreated injuries was not uncommon, highlighting the brutal reality that the profession demanded a toll that could not be measured merely by a day's work. Even the seemingly minor injuries of the forge carried lifelong consequences. A cut from a hammer or an anvil could leave scar tissue that limited movement, while repeated burns reduced flexibility in the hands and wrists. Over years, these accumulated traumas created a body marked by pain, rigidity, and reduced functionality. Blacksmiths learned to work despite these limitations, adapting techniques to compensate for weakened muscles, stiff joints, or impaired vision. The ingenuity required to continue producing high-quality work under these conditions speaks to the resilience and determination of these laborers, yet it also underscores the inescapable physical costs of the profession. The heat of the forge compounded long-term damage. Constant exposure to extreme temperatures placed strain on the cardiovascular system, causing dehydration, fatigue, and in some cases, heat-related illnesses. Blacksmiths' hearts, working tirelessly to pump blood under physically taxing conditions, often suffered from overexertion. The combination of heat, heavy labor, and repetitive motion created a systemic strain that manifested as chronic fatigue, dizziness, and a general deterioration of overall health over time. This relentless assault on the body meant that even periods of rest offered only temporary relief, as the cumulative effects of years of labor continued to manifest in pain, stiffness, and disease. One of the most insidious, long-term effects of blacksmithing was cumulative trauma. The body adapted to repetitive stress in ways that allowed continued work, but ultimately led to breakdown. Tendons, muscles, and joints hardened under constant strain, making movement painful and slow. Injuries that might have healed completely in modern times left permanent scars, and the compounded stress of decades of labor created chronic conditions that were unavoidable. Blacksmiths developed techniques to mitigate pain, adjusting their stance, varying the angle of hammer strikes, and pacing their work, but the underlying physical toll could never be fully eliminated. The mental toll of aging in the forge was significant as well. Older blacksmiths faced the dual challenge of declining physical capacity and continued economic pressure. They were responsible not only for their own survival, but often for the well-being of apprentices, family members, or the broader community dependent on their labor. The knowledge that one's strength and endurance were fading added psychological strain to an already punishing life. For some, this awareness brought a quiet resignation. For others, it fueled determination, pushing them to continue working despite mounting pain and fatigue. Injuries could also have cascading effects. A sprained wrist, for example, could impair a blacksmith's ability to hold the hammer properly, leading to misaligned strikes and additional injuries. A single burn could reduce the flexibility of a finger, complicating future work. Over time, these small setbacks accumulated into significant physical limitations, forcing the blacksmith to adapt constantly and sometimes limiting the range of tasks they could perform. The body became a map of past injuries, each scar and stiffened joint telling the story of decades of labor, danger, and perseverance. Even off the job, blacksmith's health remained compromised. Nights offered little relief from pain, as arthritis, muscle fatigue, and injuries continued to cause discomfort. Sleep was often restless, with the mind and body still carrying the echoes of the day's labor. The environment outside the forge provided little respite either. Medieval towns were often crowded, unsanitary, and exposed to disease, compounding the health challenges faced by those already physically compromised by decades of work. Despite these overwhelming challenges, blacksmiths continued their craft, driven by necessity, skill, and pride. The long-term health effects were accepted as part of the profession, an unspoken truth of life in the forge. Each day was a negotiation between ambition, responsibility, and the limitations of the human body. Even as joints stiffened, vision dimmed, and lungs struggled for breath, blacksmiths persevered, their work essential to the survival of communities that often failed to fully recognize their sacrifices. Ultimately, the long-term health effects of blacksmithing reveal a profession that was as much a test of endurance as of skill. The physical, respiratory, and musculoskeletal consequences were compounded by mental strain, creating a life defined by both accomplishment and suffering. The blacksmith's body was a living record of decades of labor, injury, adaptation, and resilience. Each scar, each stiffened joint, each wheezing breath was a testament to the human capacity to endure, to create, and to sustain society even at great personal cost. To fully appreciate the life of a medieval blacksmith, one must see beyond the immediate spectacle of hammer striking iron, sparks flying and fire roaring. One must consider the slow, insidious toll of years spent in the forge, the arthritis, the respiratory decline, the cumulative injuries, and the constant pain that shaped every aspect of existence. Their bodies were tools as much as their anvils and hammers, subjected to the same forces they wielded, enduring the heat, the impact, and the relentless labor necessary to sustain themselves and the world around them. Blacksmiths were architects of the medieval world, but their bodies were often the casualties of their craft. The long-term effects of their labor created a life defined by pain, endurance, and adaptation, a testament to the resilience of humans in the face of relentless physical and mental demands. Their survival depended on skill, strength, and fortitude, yet even mastery could not prevent the inevitable wear and tear that defined decades at the forge. Through all of this, blacksmiths found meaning and purpose in their craft. The pain, injury, and chronic conditions were weighed against the knowledge that their labor sustained farms, armies, homes, and towns. Each hammer strike, each piece of forged iron, was a small triumph against the slow decay of the body, a reminder that while the human form is fragile, skill, perseverance, and dedication can create enduring impact. Even as arthritis stiffened the fingers, as lungs labored with each breath, and as muscles weakened under decades of stress, blacksmiths carried on, shaping metal and society alike. The story of the blacksmith's long-term health is a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the hidden costs of sustaining civilization. It is a reminder that behind every tool, every weapon, and every household item forged in medieval towns was a human being whose body bore the consequences of decades of unrelenting labor. Pain, injury, and chronic illness were inseparable from the profession, yet so too were skill, pride, and the quiet dignity of creating what others needed to survive. The life of a medieval blacksmith was not only a battle of fire, iron, and relentless physical labor, it was also a constant challenge to the mind. To survive in the forge, one had to endure not just heat and burns, but also the unrelenting mental strain of a profession where every movement carried consequence. The forge demanded not only strength and skill, but constant vigilance, foresight, and mental endurance, qualities that were tested day after day, year after year. Mental fatigue was as inescapable as the heat of the fire, a silent companion to every hammer strike, quench, and careful inspection of metal. From the earliest days of apprenticeship, a young blacksmith learned that mistakes could be catastrophic. A sword misshaped, a plowshare uneven, or a horseshoe ill-fitted could have real consequences for the people who relied on these tools. In a battlefield, a poorly forged sword could mean the difference between life and death for a soldier. On a farm, a defective plow could ruin a harvest. Blacksmiths carried the weight of this responsibility constantly, and the awareness that their work impacted the lives of others was an ever-present mental burden. Unlike modern jobs where mistakes can often be corrected or are low stakes, in the medieval forge, errors could ripple outward with devastating consequences. This pressure manifested as constant vigilance. Blacksmiths had to monitor the temperature of the metal carefully, gauge the impact of each hammer strike, and anticipate how every piece would behave when quenched. They needed to understand the properties of the materials at a level that went beyond mere observation. predicting how iron or steel would bend, twist, or crack under force. A lapse in concentration for even a moment could ruin hours of labor. The mind was constantly engaged, balancing creative judgment, technical skill, and risk management. Unlike repetitive work that can become almost automatic, blacksmithing required both precision and problem-solving simultaneously, leading to cognitive fatigue over time. The forge also imposed severe time pressures. Medieval blacksmiths often worked from before dawn until well after sunset, and in some cases through the night. Farmers needed plows and hoes, townsfolk required nails and household items, and soldiers demanded weapons and armor. Deadlines were not suggestions, they were essential for survival. Meeting these demands required a mental stamina that mirrored the physical demands of the work. Blacksmiths were forced to maintain focus for hours on end, despite heat, exhaustion, and the lingering pain from injuries or chronic conditions. The mind was expected to remain sharp and alert while the body was pushed to its limits, a combination that left many blacksmiths mentally drained even after the forge fell silent at night. Repetition, while necessary, also weighed on the mind. Daily tasks were largely predictable: heat the metal, shape it, quench it, repeat. Yet within this repetition was the constant need for variation, judgment, and adaptation. No two pieces of metal behaved exactly the same, and every day brought a slightly different challenge. While physical labor may have allowed the muscles to find a rhythm, the brain was never allowed to rest. Each day demanded acute attention, and over time this unrelenting cognitive engagement resulted in mental fatigue, irritability, and in some cases long-term stress-related issues. The social expectations surrounding blacksmiths amplified the mental strain. Townsfolk depended on the blacksmith not just for functionality but for reliability and trustworthiness. Customers expected high-quality work delivered on time. A mistake could result not only in financial loss but also in damage to the blacksmith's reputation, which could affect future work, guild standing, and even social standing in the community. Unlike today's workplaces, where mistakes might be excused or retried, the medieval blacksmith faced public accountability for errors. This created a subtle yet constant pressure, a need to perform perfectly while navigating the daily hardships of labor, danger, and exhaustion. Mental strain was compounded by the isolation inherent in the work. While townsfolk went about their social lives, the blacksmith spent most of the day in the forge, surrounded by heat, smoke, and metal. Interaction with others was often limited to brief exchanges with customers or apprentices. The forge could feel like a cage, a solitary environment in which the demands of labor left little room for conversation, reflection, or mental respite. This isolation magnified the effects of stress, creating an environment where the mind was continuously occupied with problem-solving, anticipation of risk, and the weight of responsibility. Economic pressures also played a role in mental strain. Pay was modest, often dependent on fluctuating demand for tools, weapons, or repairs. A period of low demand could create anxiety about the ability to provide for family or apprentices. The blacksmith's mental state was therefore intertwined with their financial survival. Every project had to be completed efficiently and correctly, as errors or delays could mean real economic hardship. The mind was constantly calculating risk, planning workflow, and anticipating potential problems, creating a continuous undercurrent of tension that few outside the profession could imagine. Physical pain and fatigue, themselves relentless, also exacerbated mental strain. Chronic injuries, arthritis, burns, and respiratory problems made the work of the forge mentally taxing as well as physically. Concentration became harder to maintain. Frustration could arise from repetitive tasks that caused pain, and the knowledge that the body might fail under stress added another layer of anxiety. Older blacksmiths in particular faced the challenge of diminished physical capacity paired with persistent economic and social pressures, creating a mental load that compounded with each passing year. The apprenticeship system, while necessary for skill development, intensified the mental challenges. Young apprentices were under strict supervision and rigorous schedules, often working long hours under demanding masters. Mistakes were not tolerated lightly, and the fear of reprimand or injury heightened mental tension. Apprentices had to absorb complex knowledge about metallurgy, tool-making, and physical technique, while also learning to anticipate hazards and work efficiently under pressure. The cognitive demands on young minds were immense, creating stress that persisted into adulthood as they assumed full responsibility for the forge. Blacksmiths also faced emotional challenges tied to the perception of their work. Despite the essential nature of their labor, their contributions were often overlooked or undervalued. Villagers might depend entirely on their skill, yet offer little recognition beyond the payment of coins. This subtle undervaluing of effort, combined with the visibility of risk and the intensity of work, created a psychological tension. The blacksmith was critical to society, yet rarely celebrated. The mental burden of performing essential work without societal acknowledgement was an enduring stressor, often leading to feelings of frustration, resentment, or isolation. The unpredictability of accidents and injuries added a persistent anxiety. Each day in the forge carried the possibility of burns, crushing injuries, or accidents involving molten metal. Even the most careful blacksmith could not fully mitigate these risks, and the knowledge that harm could strike at any moment created a heightened state of mental alertness. Over time, this constant vigilance could become exhausting, leading to chronic stress, tension, and hyper-awareness that extended beyond the forge into personal life. Sleep was often restless, with lingering worry about past mistakes or future hazards. Mental strain was also influenced by the stakes of the blacksmith's craft. A miscalculated hammer strike could ruin a weapon, a plow, or a piece of armor. These mistakes had real consequences for the community, for the blacksmith's reputation, and for their economic survival. The mind was required to operate with precision, creativity, and foresight simultaneously. Unlike many forms of labor where repetitive motion is enough, blacksmithing demanded constant judgment and adaptation. Each decision carried weight, and over time the cumulative effect of these pressures shaped a psyche accustomed to tension and rapid problem-solving. The psychological demands extended to leadership and mentoring. Master blacksmiths were responsible not only for their own work, but also for guiding apprentices, ensuring the quality of the forge's output, and maintaining the efficiency of production. Supervising apprentices while managing one's own workload required multitasking, emotional regulation, and strategic thinking, all under the stress of time constraints and physical exhaustion. Failure to maintain control over the workshop could result in accidents, defective products, or a tarnished reputation. The mental strain of balancing these responsibilities contributed significantly to the overall burden of the profession. Social interactions themselves could be taxing. While blacksmiths were respected for their skill, they were also subjected to scrutiny and expectation from villagers, customers, and guild members. Every complaint, every comment on quality or timeliness weighed on the mind. Blacksmiths had to manage these social pressures while maintaining focus on tasks that were physically and mentally demanding. The mental strain was continuous, as the forge was a place of both creation and judgment, where skill was observed, evaluated, and relied upon by a community that often had little understanding of the complexity of the work. Cognitive adaptation became a survival mechanism. Experienced blacksmiths developed strategies to cope with the mental load, pattern recognition, anticipatory thinking, and reliance on muscle memory. The brain learned to anticipate metal behavior, predict hazards, and coordinate complex sequences of action. Yet even with experience, mental strain never disappeared entirely. Each new project, new batch of metal, or unforeseen complication introduced fresh challenges, ensuring that the mind remained engaged, alert, and, at times, exhausted. The psychological weight of responsibility extended beyond the forge itself. Blacksmiths were often heads of households, primary providers, and community pillars. Economic uncertainty, the need to support apprentices, and the social expectation to produce essential tools added layers of stress that were inseparable from the work. The mental strain was both professional and personal, blending the challenges of physical labor with the pressures of social, economic, and familial responsibility. Even during periods of relative rest, the blacksmith's mind remained occupied. Planning, anticipating future orders, repairing tools, and maintaining the forge required continuous attention. Unlike modern jobs that allow for breaks or downtime, medieval blacksmiths often found themselves thinking about work even when away from the anvil. The mental load was pervasive, extending into sleep, meals, and family interactions. Stress and fatigue accumulated over time, creating long-term consequences for mental health, including irritability, anxiety, and cognitive weariness. Despite the immense mental strain, blacksmiths derived meaning and satisfaction from their craft. The skill required, the tangible results of their labor, and the knowledge that their work sustained their community provided psychological reward. Pride in craftsmanship, problem-solving mastery, and the ability to create tools that enabled survival offered a counterbalance to the relentless pressures of the forge. This sense of purpose allowed blacksmiths to endure mental and emotional fatigue, transforming the challenges of the profession into a source of identity, resilience, and personal accomplishment. In sum, the mental strain of being a medieval blacksmith was as real, pervasive, and enduring as the physical toll of the forge. Every day demanded concentration, judgment, foresight, and emotional resilience. The stakes were high. A single mistake could have physical, economic, or social consequences. Hours of repetitive, strenuous labor combined with constant vigilance created chronic stress, fatigue, and mental exhaustion. The mind was engaged in problem-solving, risk management, and emotional regulation without pause, shaping blacksmiths into individuals of extraordinary mental endurance. Even as their hands blistered, lungs labored, and joints stiffened, blacksmiths carried the weight of their craft with a psychological fortitude that mirrored their physical strength. The mental strain of the forge was not merely an incidental hardship, it was inseparable from the identity, skill, and survival of the blacksmith. Understanding their mental world offers a deeper appreciation for the resilience, ingenuity, and dedication required to thrive in a profession defined by fire, metal, and unyielding pressure. The life of a medieval blacksmith, when examined through the lens of mental strain, reveals a human experience defined by endurance, precision, and constant vigilance. It was a life where the mind was as taxed as the body, where every decision carried weight, and where the cumulative effects of stress and responsibility shaped not only daily existence, but decades of human experience. In the forge, blacksmiths faced an unrelenting test of cognitive, emotional, and psychological resilience, demonstrating that the true challenge of their craft was as much mental as it was physical.